Welcome to Family Foundations for Optimal Sexual Development. This is a 10-part series to equip and encourage parents to guide and support their children toward optimal sexual health, protecting their current and their future well-being in a culture that sexualizes children. During the series, you'll hear the term optimal health or optimal sexual health. When you hear this, we are referring to a holistic approach to health that includes physical health, mental health, emotional health, social, relational health, and spiritual health. This 10-part series has been developed by 3 people. My name is Phil Lees, and I'm a sexual risk avoidance specialist. I'm also the CEO for Peace Education Services here in Canada, where we have been guiding parents and youth in the area of healthy sexuality for more than 25 years. I'm married to my wife, Ruth, and we have 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren.
Aloha, this is Dave Woweber, and I reside in Hawaii, and I am with an organization called Onipa'a, where I teach sexual risk avoidance to youth and parents. I have a master's degree in family life ministry, and I have a sexual risk avoidance specialist certificate, as well as a certificate in teaching heritage keepers. My family, 3 children, almost adults, late teens, early 20s, reside with us in Hawaii, and one of them is a special needs child, which she's awesome, and my kids really have made me into a man, husband, and a father, and I want to share some of that with you over these sessions.
Hi, I'm Lori Kirkendall. I'm the president of Beacon Health Education Resources, and I live in Flower Mound, Texas in the United States. I hold a master's degree in public health and have just now at 30 years of experience with health education and specifically sex or abstinence education, as we'll be focusing on in these sessions. My husband Chris and I have been married almost 30 years, and we have 4 young adult children, and I'm glad to be a part of this series. I'm glad to be a part of encouraging parents, and let's just jump into what I think are 3 fundamental truths about parenting. First of all, parenting is hard. It is hard every day. Can we just kind of relax into that, or as I like to say, it is not a job for sissies. And secondly, parenting is personal. It's unique. Each one of us has a unique makeup of our families, a different number of children, they have different ages, different sexes, different personalities. And we all bring our own unique experiences and backgrounds to the table as well in the parenting relationship. So what I do in my home may look very different than what you'll do in your home. We're going to share with you some practical information and resources and guidance and principles that you can apply in your home in a personal way. But what you do with your home is ultimately up to you. And lastly, I'd like to say that parenting is imperfect. There are no perfect parents and there are no perfect children. We are all doing our best with what we've been given in the moment to help our children grow to be loving and successful adults. So with that, we want to thank you for being a part of this series. Thank you for committing to this time for your children. That puts you well ahead of many parents who don't care as much as you do. Your children will be better off for it, and we look forward to going through this content together.
This is session 1, an introduction. In this session, we're going to answer some questions. Is youth sex a risk? Are youth sexually active? What are the strategies for educating youth about sex? What are some of the factors influencing youth sexual activity? Why are some youth sexually active and others are not? And who or what should be guiding youth in this important area of life? Before I start, I'd like to use this analogy though with parents. What is the goal of parenting? Well, we need to get our children from the island of childhood to the shoreline of adulthood, where our kids can begin to achieve their goals. That can include university, college, beginning a trade, a career, start a family, build a home, and achieve their spiritual goals. But as parents, we have to get them across the risky waters of the youth years, where teen sex, pornography, drugs, and alcohol can have negative impact on life goal achievement. First question, is youth sex a risk? When people think of the risks of youth sex, they automatically think of the physical consequences, pregnancy, and sexually transmitted infections. However, the research shows that even if a child does not become pregnant or acquire a sexually transmitted infection, there are many other social, emotional, academic, and economic consequences. Early sexual activity can lead to a pattern of failed relationships, increased depression, spiritual conflict, reduced academic achievement, and yes, even reduced earning potential. And it leads to increased exposure to drugs, alcohol, domestic violence, and even sex trafficking. These can be lasting, negative, generational consequences. However, the research also supports that youth who avoid non-marital sex have improved mental health, better family and social relationships, better academic achievement and earning potential, and they are more likely to achieve their life goals. And they also have reduced exposure to drugs, alcohol, crime, and sex trafficking. These are lasting generational blessings. Second question, are youth sexually active? Well, the U.S. Youth Risk Behavior Survey is administered to students every 2 years. And this survey asks the students 3 questions. Have you ever had sexual intercourse? Have you had 4 or more lifetime sexual partners? And are you currently sexually active? Meaning, have you had sexual intercourse in the past 3 months? And you'll notice by the stats that the statistics are going down. They're going in the right direction. But why is it youth sexually transmitted infections have been increasing exponentially? The Canadian Pediatric Society report may give us some hints. This shows us that youth 14 years of age, 9% engage in intercourse, 30% engage in oral sex, 67% deep kissing, 61% sexual touch above the waist, and 53% sexual touch below the waist. And as students age, that does increase slightly. But you'll notice, even the 16-year-olds, only 24% have engaged in intercourse, meaning 76% have not. But with all the other sexual activity, such as oral sex, anal sex, that may be the reason why our sexually transmitted infections are increasing. Sometimes faith families say to me, our kids go to church, Phil. Church kids aren't involved sexually that much. But the research shows that faith kids engage in sex at a rate just below the non-faith kids. So, in summary, are you sexually active? Some have had intercourse, most have not. And it does increase with age. But I want you to keep in mind that 91% of grade 9 students and 76% of grade 11 students have not engaged in intercourse. And we're going to use this information later on in the series. What are the strategies for guiding youth about sex? Well, there are 2 broad strategies. The first one, comprehensive sex ed. That's the dominant strategy here in Ontario, Canada, the United States. It's driven by Planned Parenthood, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations. And here in Canada, it's driven by SECAN, the Sexual Information Education Council of Canada, and in the US, SEEK-US, the Sexual Information and Education Council of the United States. The other approach is called sexual risk avoidance. It's based upon the public health primary prevention strategy. This is being encouraged and driven by organizations like Ascend, the Institute for Research and Evaluation, the Institute for Women's Health, and many curriculum providers and policy organizations. The premise of comprehensive sex ed is people are sexual from birth. We all have sexual rights to engage safely and consensually, whatever age, and many youth are sexually active. So, youth need the knowledge and the skills to reduce risks and have mutually satisfying sexual relations. In contrast, sexual risk avoidance says youth sex has many risks. Most youth are not sexually active, and the majority of youth who are sexually active regret. So youth need the knowledge and skills to protect their future by avoiding the risks of non-marital sex. So which approach is best for our children? Keep in mind, 91% of kids in grade 9 have not engaged in intercourse, and 76% have not engaged in intercourse in grade 11. Which approach is best for our children? As we've shared, the majority of youth have not engaged in intercourse. As we go through this series, we're hoping you're going to get the tools and the resources to choose the best approach for your children, which we believe is sexual risk avoidance. So, what are the factors influencing youth sexual activity? Why are some youth sexually active and others are not? Let's look at the social ecological model. It's used by the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States and applied to sexual activity. And the social ecological model divides the factors into 3 areas. First, we need to consider the individual factors: the biological, the psychological, the cognitive, the health behaviors, and the individual person's intentions and beliefs. Second, we look at the interpersonal factors: the influence of parents and families, peers and partners, romantic partners, and the community on sexual activity. And third, we look at the environmental factors that can affect sexual activity: the neighborhood you live in, the media you're exposed to, government policies, and the sex ed programs that children are exposed to. This model outlines all of the factors, the environmental, the interpersonal, and the individual factors that can affect youth sexual activity. Let's look at some of those. First, individual factors. Biological factors. You'll notice down the side, though, first, you have a minus sign, which means that this could contribute towards youth being involved in sexual activity. A plus sign, which means this could contribute towards sexual risk avoidance or being abstinent. And then sometimes you'll see an M, which means that factor is modifiable. If it's a negative, you can influence that, reduce the risk of the negative, and maybe even shift it to a positive. So let's look at these factors. Biological factor. If it's an older youth, yes, they're more likely to be involved in sexual activity. Female, they're more likely to delay sexual activity until they're older. Racial or ethnic minorities, that could be a plus or a minus. Emotional factors include depressive symptoms and anxiety that can lead to children being sexually active. But you'll notice that's modifiable. We can reduce the impact of that. Negative self-image. Negative self-image or body objectification. Emotional regulation, self-determination, and sexual refusal skills. Can we train our kids to refuse being involved sexually when they're being encouraged or coerced? Cognitive ability. Do they have academic aspirations for a career? If they do, then they're more likely, that encourages them towards avoiding sexual activity. Do they have high cognitive and intellectual ability? What about their health behaviors? Are they involved with drugs and alcohol? That can be an influence towards sexual activity. What are their intentions, their beliefs, and their attachments? Is their intention to avoid sex? Do they have positive beliefs about avoiding sex? And that's a good thing if I can do that, and protects my future. Do they attend church? That can be a positive influence. We look at interpersonal factors like family. Are the children connected to their parents? If they are, that's a positive influence towards abstinence. Parental monitoring. If parents are monitoring where their children are, who they're with, who their friends are, that's a positive influence. Communication with parents about sexual activity. Do the parents communicate with the children and the children communicate with the parents? That's a positive influence. Living with 2 biological parents is a positive factor. Their peers. Are the peers involved in risky behavior? Is there a presence of positive peer role models? And that's something that's modifiable. Parents, you can have influence over that. And are they involved with romantic sexual partners? Environmental factors. Neighborhood characteristics can have some influence. Are they in a community that is a safe community? Is it a neighborhood that is more poverty-oriented? What kind of media are they exposed to? Are they very involved in social media, exposed to internet porn? Government legislation and policies can have a negative impact because you hear all the time about sexual and reproductive rights. That can have a negative influence. And sexual health education programs can be a positive or a negative influence depending on the curriculum that the children are exposed to. Altogether, the environmental factors plus the interpersonal factors plus the individual factors lead to potential outcomes. Either abstinence outcomes, and that can include non-sexual outcomes such as improved academic achievement, positive physical and mental health, or youth sex outcomes, which can involve teen intercourse, STIs, teen pregnancy, and non-sexual outcomes, which can include lower academic achievement, reduced earning potential, and reduced life goal achievement. You'll notice as we went through all of the factors that many of them are modifiable, and we've listed them here in the chart. Parents, you can make a big difference. You can work to help limit those negative factors and maximize those positive factors. To help you become familiar with the factors contributing to youth sexual activity, we've created a survey for you. You can pull out this survey for homework, have a look at that survey. I want you to think about a person that you're very familiar with, a young child. I'm thinking of a boy that I'm familiar with. It's an older child, older youth, so that can be a negative factor. Child is a male, so that is a negative factor contributing towards sexual activity. When it comes to emotional and psychological well-being, the person does tend to have depressive symptoms. He has had negative life events, and he does have a very high, somewhat overinflated self-esteem. But on the positive side, he's very self-determined, and I have actually seen him apply sexual refusal skills. So go through the survey for the person you're thinking of, the teen or the child you're thinking of, and check off the factors that apply to that child. Total those factors up, and this could be an indicator for you as to the factors that you as a parent could be focusing on as you're working with your child.
So our final question is, who should be guiding youth? We know that the secular society certainly is, that youth decisions are influenced by culture, by their schools, by the internet, by pornography, and by media. But we also know that parents and family have a key role in guiding them forward, and we also know that a faith community does as well. But often parents and family and also faith communities feel unequipped. They don't feel equipped with the right information or the right approach that can help influence and guide youth in the way we want them to go. So let's ask what the youth are saying. What are teens saying about who should be guiding them? 40% of them say sex education classes pressure them to be sexually active. A majority of those who have been sexually active regret that sexual activity, and a majority didn't know that they could say no. I love that 87% of the young people surveyed wished parents had been equipped to guide them. They want their parents talking to them about these important topics. And 75% say the church should play a greater role in guiding them. One thing we would say about guiding youth is that it isn't an atomic bomb approach, as we might say, the talk. In past years, it might have been said that parents should sit down and give their children, as they go into puberty, the talk. But today's youth need so much more than that. We do know that we need to be starting early and at younger ages because we know the cultural messages and lies are coming at them sooner. We also know that it should be a sequential approach, guiding our children along with age-appropriate information that builds upon itself as they're exposed to greater and more information and able to take on a higher level of more mature content. And what I think is most important is that guiding youth should be relational. that it should be with us, hand in hand with them, walking alongside this tough road of adolescence and growing into adulthood. We'd like you to think about 100 one-minute talks instead of a 100-minute talk. We've got to keep doing this and doing it over and again, and we're going to give you the information and skills to do just that. So there are 3 key strategies that parents can utilize to maximize the impact they have on their children's health. First, we'll look at monitoring, then connectedness, and then communication. So what is parental monitoring? Well, it's actually defined by the United States Center for Disease Control as knowing these things. Do we know what they are doing, who they are with, where they are, and have we set some clear expectations for their behavior with some check-ins to be sure that they're following up? If you can answer those questions about your children, it says you will reduce their teens' risk for injury, pregnancy, STIs, and cigarette, alcohol, and drug use. Parental monitoring may seem simple to you, but I want you to know how powerful it is and how many parents simply aren't able or interested in doing that with their children. You are, so that puts you well ahead of the game. So monitor, be in the game, and be watching over your kids on a regular basis. And then a second idea is parental connectedness, the connection of relational closeness with your child. And we talk about the power of the dinner hour, gathering around. Even if you can't gather each night, try to gather at some time during the day. Maybe it's breakfast. Maybe it's late at night after everyone's home from their activities. Maybe it's on a Saturday morning when you all have pancakes together. But there is power in gathering around the table together. And as it says in the research, when we talk about everyday things, we can facilitate a basic comfort level that enhances daily communication. When we sit around together, we show our children that we are making them a priority, and that builds trust in that relationship. And lastly, that parents there around that table on a regular basis can observe changes in patterns that can be indicators of potential problems. You'll be knowing what's going on or what's coming or what's changing when you're gathered there around the table. Research also defines a connectedness scale. These 7 questions that put a list of how close the child perceives the relationship with their parents to be. You might even be able to screenshot this and use these questions to start conversations with your children. Can you talk to your mom about problems you're having? Can you talk to your dad about problems you're having? What about on that scale that they give? How much do you feel your parents care about you, and so on? Listen to them. We know that the research shows the paternal or father impact is strong across communication and across connectedness. When parents and fathers especially are involved, we know adolescent sexual behavior goes down. When paternal communication, when parents say they disapprove of sexual activity, we see sexual debut being delayed, a strong connection there. And I like this third point from this report, showing that higher emotional quality of the father to adolescent relationship and greater paternal involvement were associated with decreased adolescent sexual behaviors. Dads, you really matter, and the research shows that. What about moms? Well, it's also shown in the research that the adolescent's perception of maternal disapproval, has she communicated that she disapproves of teen sexual activity, along with high levels of mother-child connectedness, there's our relational closeness word, were directly and independently associated with delays in sexual intercourse. So really it becomes, are you talking about important topics? This last study I'll show you, so 6 topics that if parents were talking about, their children were more likely to avoid sexual activity, along with other risks, putting their current and future health at risk. So we've covered a lot to get us going in this first session. So I'll just wrap up session 1. We looked at, is youth sex a risk? And we saw, yes, absolutely, physically and across relational and emotional consequences as well. Are youth sexually active? Some are, most aren't, and we know that that increases with age. We've looked at some strategies for educating youth about sex, comparing comprehensive sex education and sexual risk avoidance, which we will dive much more into later in our series. We looked at the broad research addressing factors influencing youth sexual activity and how many of them are modifiable by parents. And lastly, we looked at who should be guiding youth in this important area of life, and we agreed parents and church should be strong voices to counter the misinformation and pressure our young people are getting in our sexualized culture. So here's where we're going in this 10-part series. You can see the topics here. Next up, we'll look at adolescent development. Session 3 is a unique session on the body speaks. 4, risks of youth sex. We'll develop out those physical and emotional relational consequences we introduced here. The 5th one will be technology, social media, sexting, and pornography. Key topics related to all of this. Session 6 is sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, hot topics, challenging topics to today. We want to give you the best information to pass along to your children, to pass your values along to your children. Then we'll look at great parenting and a path to healthy marriage. We'll wrap up with comparing more around comprehensive sex ed and sexual risk avoidance in sex education, and end up with advocacy. How can you advocate for these truths in your home and out into your community and beyond? So we've got a big road ahead of us. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to journeying forward with you. In each of our sessions, we'll give you homework. So I'll give you quickly our homework for this session. We want you to take the worksheet we provided called Factors Contributing to Youth Sexual Activity. It gives instructions on how to fill out, looking just like we did earlier with Phil, looking at the different factors that influence youth sexual activity, and then go back through and look at the ones that you can be a part of modifying in a positive way for your kids. So that wraps up session 1. We'll close out with some contact information that you can get in touch with us at Peace Education Services, and we're so glad you've joined us for this series.